Next, we're going to hear from Senator Eldridge, followed by Representative Sicolo.
Chair McCown, I'm Owens.
Oh, yes, because Representative Owens was number 8, so you moved him up. I'm sure he's very pleased about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cahill, Chair Roush, members of the committee. Thank you so much for taking me doubly out of turn, I suppose. Yeah, we're here to speak in favor of H.481 and S.481, an act establishing a climate change superfund in promoting polluter responsibility, or as you'll hear, the Polluters Pay Act. The principle of Polluters Pay is very simple. Those who make a mess should be the ones who clean it up. This is what I'm trying to teach my 2 boys. The oldest is 16. Maybe one day it will take. The bill we proposed is very simple as well. It imposes a fee on the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in Massachusetts that would go into a climate resiliency fund. One of the things that we've heard is, how are we going to pay for the cleanup we need to do? How are we going to pay for the resiliency that we need? This is a mechanism to do that. These would be polluters that release over 1 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. For reference, the average American releases about 16 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. 16, not 16,000, not 16 million, 16. So we're targeting really the 20 biggest polluters in the nation. And most of them have, by the way, forecasted how climate change would cause global temperatures to rise as long ago as the 70s. Their research predicted how burning fossil fuels would warm the planet, and even as the companies publicly denied these links. And they've gotten away with polluting our air with greenhouse gases, knowing the consequences. And this bill would require that big polluters pay a fee based on the share of historic emissions, and that fee would go to the DEP for the purposes of a climate change adaptation superfund. And the Superfund model for dealing with pollution, it works. It's worked for a long time. In my community, the Watertown Arsenal is a Superfund success story. The EPA added the site to the national priorities list in 1994. Cleanup activities removed contamination. They demolished a nuclear reactor. And now the Arsenal is an economic engine of growth for Watertown, again, a clean one. A climate resiliency superfund will do the same for the areas most impacted by the devastating effects of climate change. We know that the storms are getting more serious. The sea level will rise, shorelines erode, storm surges will impact our coast. The Polluters Pay Act could raise about $10 billion over the next 10 years, which would go to these adaptation projects. Estimates show that just one hurricane could deal up to $76 billion in damages, not to mention loss of life potential. That money we're going to have to spend one way or the other. And what we're asking is that the folks who have polluted the atmosphere, who have put the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, be the ones that help bear some sort of responsibility for that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I hope you will give this bill a favorable review. Pass it to my co-filer.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Owens, and thank you to Chairman Cahill and Chairwoman Roush for taking us at a turn, and to the members of the Joint Committee on Natural Resources and Agriculture. And earlier today, there was a great rally for the Make Polluters Pay bill. We're very proud to file this bill. And I just want to highlight this is in partnership with 350 Mass, Our Climate, Mass Youth Climate Coalition, UU Mass Action, CREW, the Better Future Project, Sierra Club, Mass Climate Action Network, the Pipeline Awareness Network, Clean Water Action, Mass Power Forward, Vote Solar, and Climate Code Blue, as well as many local grassroots climate groups. And you already heard from Representative Owens about sort of the model of this. Is you think about to the Superfund, the federal circle law, and the impact it's had. And I'll just say briefly, in my hometown of Acton, when the company W.R. Grace dumped toxic chemicals, there was a charge under the strict liability model that continues to have W.R. Grace pay for the damage that was done. Now on that land, there's going to be actually solar project and then potentially some affordable housing. So it does have an impact. But I think the frustration that perhaps all of us as legislators face is that our communities are asking for funding for climate resiliency, for climate action, to do our part to support clean energy. But still, there's not really a dedicated revenue source. And I know there's a lot of different proposals for that. This is one of them, again, based on that Superfund model. And I think what I would highlight is, what are some of the climate resiliency or the climate actions that are needed to best support our communities, given the fact that climate change is already happening, global warming is already happening. So everything from building seawalls and conducting coastal protections, performing ecological restoration projects to save damaged habitats and essential natural environments, upgrading stormwater management systems, sewage treatment plants to mitigate the damages of extreme weather events. Representative Owens cited the potential that if a hurricane hit Massachusetts, which had just hit Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York several years ago, billions of dollars of damage that could happen very easily here in Massachusetts. And I would also highlight just our current infrastructure. It's going to have a negative impact on roads, bridges, subways, and transit systems, as well as the ongoing conversation about how to upgrade the electric grid. At the end of the day, we need a funding source. And so I would respectfully submit that this is one funding support source under that superfund model, and greatly appreciate the committee's consideration of this bill, which is based on a national legislation filed in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. Any questions from the committee? Chair Roush.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Great to see you both. Couple of questions. And I first want to say, as you know, I also have kids in the you make a mess, you clean it up phase. And so I certainly appreciate that and appreciate the goals of the bill's trying to achieve. There's two questions. The first is the bill provides a definition for environmental justice populations. We already have a definition of environmental justice communities and populations in statutory law. So how does the language in your bill relate to what exists statutorily already?
Yeah, I think that might have been an oversight as far as this legislation has been worked on for a couple of years. We're happy to make changes or have the chairs make changes to just say it applies to the current environmental justice law.
Okay. And the second is that the bill applies retroactively, right? The covered period pursuant to the bill is January 1st, 2000, to December 31st, 2018, presumably inclusive. Has any constitutional legality analysis been done as to whether we could retroactively apply a pretty hefty fee to things that happened in some cases several decades ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the things I want to highlight, and I really appreciate the work of Governor Healy during her time as Attorney General, where obviously, as we know, she sued ExxonMobil to find out that ExxonMobil, through various private memos as well as other oil companies, knew about this going back to the 1970s, about the damage that their drilling oil and contributing to climate was going to have a negative effect on our Earth and our global warming levels. Just specifically, ExxonMobil had data correctly predicting global warming back in 1977. So I guess, Madam Chairman, I guess I would submit, and again, not absolutely certain about this, but under the Superfund CERCLA model of strict liability, if there's a connection to prove, which I do believe there is, prove that there has been that damage that's led to these negative impacts on Massachusetts and, of course, the rest of the world, under that strict liability model, could we then charge that fee to the companies that cause global warming, and therefore, it's charging a fee that would cause the companies to continue to pay and would pay based on past damage to our environment. That's my thought. I think you make a great point about there's constitutional issues, and appreciate the committee, considering that and open to making any changes.
So, I mean, is there something, I have read the bill, but we have many bills before us today. Is there something in the language that, in the language of the bill as filed, that effectively creates the kind of nexus that you're talking about? I mean, there's a difference between filing a lawsuit and establishing proof that it through a lawsuit context, right, in front of a judge, that the polluters had knowledge that pollution was, of the pollution, and that it was causing damage going back to the 80s, 70s for a long time. And that if that's established in a court of law, that's one thing. It's a different process for us to do it statutorily. So, so is there something in the bill that requires that effectively an establishment of proof or some sort of administrative determination of proof in order for the polluters to be subject to the provisions of the bill?
It does not specifically cite that requirement. I guess, it's a back and forth between case law and whether that's connected to your point about whether that, creates a direct link to our proposal for a fee. I would just note under the climate change adaptation cost recovery program, it does, note the standard of strict liability, which again, I do think that there is, due to a lot of attorneys generals, including our former Attorney General, Maura Healey, establishing that connection. But I think you make a good point that the legislation could be clear about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. Okay, up next, we have Senator Pacheco, followed by Representative Sokolo.